Hi, everybody. Back again for Ordinary People of the Bible. My name is Brenda. I'm a Methodist layperson, if you've not been here before. And the main influence where you see that is that I tend to be more of a social justice awareness. So that's where I'm coming from. Today, we are looking at Laban, and Laban is your toxic boss. Oh, have you had one of those? Not fun. I'm going to be reading from an NIV, New International Version. For extra reference, this is a chronological Bible, so what's going to be handy is once we get a little further along into things like Numbers and Deuteronomy and or into Kings and Chronicles, the things that happen about the same time, which are repeated in some of these, will appear at the same time. So if you're interested in that, I do like chronological Bibles for that. But we're going to start Genesis 29, and we're going to start middle of verse 14. We actually have quite a few different little readings here. None of them are real long. We've got the 14b to 30, and then we're going to go to chapter 30 and just do verses 21 to 36. Chapter 31, 1 to 8 or 9, depending on where I remember to stop. And then verses 25 to 31. And then we want to look at just verse 43. But we'll start chapter 29, verses 14b to 30. Now, Jacob has run away from home because he not only bought his brother's birthright with a bowl of soup, he has now stolen his blessing, and he has made it back to their homeland, and he is with Laban, who is is actually Rebekah's brother. After Jacob had stayed with Laban for a whole month, Laban said to him, "Just because you're a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel." Laban said, "It's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me." So Jacob worked 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed only like a few days to him because of his love for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife. My time is completed, and I want to make love to her." So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob. And Jacob made love to her. And Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is it that you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Laban replied, "It's not our custom to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week. Then we will give you the younger one also, in return for another 7 years of work." And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her attendant. Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah. And he worked for Laban another 7 years. Now we're going to go on over to chapter 30, and we're starting with verse 21. Whoops. Oh, yeah, there we go. It actually, is verse 27. Okay. Jacob actually has asked to leave, take his wives, and go back to his hometown, back to Isaac, and says, give me my wives and children for whom I've served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I've done for you. But Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that God has blessed me because of you. He added, name your wages, and I will pay them. Jacob said to him, you know how I have worked for you, and how your livestock has fared under my care. The little you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when I do something, may I do something for my own household? What will I give you? Laban asked. Don't give me anything, Jacob replied, but if you will do this one thing for me, I will go on tending your flocks and watching over them. Let me go through all your flocks today and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark-colored lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages. And my honesty will testify for me in the future, and whenever you check on the wages that you have paid me. Any goat in my possession that is not speckled or spotted, or any lamb that is not dark-colored, will be considered stolen. Agreed, said Laban. Let it be as you have said. That same day he removed all the male goats that were streaked or spotted, and all the speckled and spotted female goats, all that had white on them, and all of the dark-colored lambs, and he placed them in the care of his sons. And then he put a 3-day journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob continued to tend the rest of Laban's flocks. So you see what he did there. He's like, yep, I agree to those terms. But then he goes ahead and pulls them all out and sends them on with his sons without telling Jacob. Okay. And we're going to chapter 31, starting right at the beginning. Jacob had heard that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob has taken everything away from our father and has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father. And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not as it had been. And the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the fields where his flocks were. And he said to them, I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've worked with your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. If he said the speckled ones will be your wages, then all the flocks gave birth to speckled ones. And if he said the streaked ones will be your wages, and all the flock bore streaked ones. And so next is over to verse 25. And Jacob has packed up his kids and his flocks and run away. He pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead when Laban overtook him. Laban had to take right off after him, right? And he says to Jacob, what have you done? You deceived me when you carried off my daughters like captives in a war. Why did you run off and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of timbrels and harps? You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye. You've done a foolish thing. And Jacob answered, I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. So, last little verse here, 43. Laban answered Jacob. They've been arguing a little bit here, and he says, the women are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine. Yet what can I do today about these daughters of mine, or the children they've borne? Don't you love that when he says, the women are mine, the children are mine? So the definition of a toxic boss is a leader who harms their employees and their organization by repeated behavior such as playing favorites, making unreasonable demands, taking credit for others' work, or blaming others for their mistakes. That's according to the Oxford Dictionary. And if you look at that, boy, is Laban good at that? How many times does he change his demands? And he doesn't even do it in a reasonable way. I mean, okay, Jacob says, I'll work for your second daughter. And he doesn't even get a chance. Laban tricks him and says, here, on the wedding night. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of questions as to why Jacob didn't know who he had in his bed. And knowing that kind of partying that probably was going on. Because they had, usually weddings were, a several day party. You would have everybody around. They would drink a lot of wine. And she may well have even been veiled when she was escorted in. So I don't understand. I don't know exactly what's going on. And I even did some research and no one actually goes into that very much. And I don't think that really is all that important. The important part is that Laban tricks him, changes the demands, and then says, well, you could have the second one, but you've got to work another 7 years. Now, I would have thought that this was a broken contract because, they had agreed that 7 years would be Rachel. He didn't even want Leah. But he agrees to it. He lets this toxic boss change the demands, and he works the next 7 years. And then when he decides, it's time to go home. My wives are having children. We need to just go home. Laban's like, oh, no. You've done the best job here. It's been fantastic. He's buttering him up, telling him, you've increased my wealth dramatically, and I know it's all because of you. And so what do you want for a wage? And Jacob lays out, okay, I want the streaked ones and the dark-colored ewes. And being the good old toxic boss he is, he immediately goes and separates those out so that they don't breed with the sheep and goats that are there. So now we're having to deal with recessive genes and, we've got these solid colors breeding, and God blesses them. But as you read, Jacob said, you changed my wages 10 times. So every time it looked like he was doing better, and he was doing at least as well as Laban, maybe even better. Laban changes the rules. Typical toxic boss move, Try to work with somebody, you know what it's like. If you don't, you are blessed. Let me tell you, I have worked with toxic bosses. It's hard to know what you're doing and how you're going to get from here to there when the rules change every time you make good, positive progress. So, what do we do? And how does this relate? Well, I don't see in any of Jesus's words where he says, that this is acceptable behavior. And in fact, he talks quite often, how to be fair to your laborers. And he even uses a parable of the worker or the owner who hires different people at different points of the day. Okay. Now, it actually can be used for a whole different, but in this case, this employer was trying to treat his employees in what he felt was the best way possible. What they ever agreed to. And the last group was like, okay, he's like, will you work for whatever I give you? And they were like, yes. And so he could have not paid them when they come for their wages. But he was an employer who valued his workers. He knew that they worked hard, and he didn't cheat them. He didn't wait until they come up for their wages and say, you just said you'd trust me. Too bad, so sad, sucks to be you. And that, I think, is really important for us to know. When we are in charge of people's work or people below us in working, and by below us, I just mean that in the hierarchy of supervisor and so forth, which is a very artificial kind of setup in a lot of ways. But a good supervisor, a good boss, is not going to change the rules on you, is not going to, make your life more difficult. And that's what we need to do, okay? Are we making the world around us a better place? Or are we, changing the rules on people, changing the rules on how we live, depending on who we're associating with? Do you hang with different types of people and behave in different ways to suit them? That's a toxic kind of behavior on your part, and very deceiving. You are not being an authentic self. I'm not sure Laban was an authentic self. Laban spent a lot of time, evidently, scheming. He had to be watching those sheep to see what types were being born, and then those would be the ones, the most of that. Well, that was not going to be Jacob's wage. That was going to go to his flock. And so he's not an authentic self. He's even playing games with his own self. And so we have to work on being an authentic self, which means, no matter who we're with, we should always be displaying that love of Christ, right? Your behavior. Whenever somebody does something and proclaims it to be, good or right, and if I disagree, my comment now is to please explain to me how that demonstrates the love of Christ. And so I think that's something that a lot of toxic bosses need to stop and look at, is how is my behavior reflecting the love of Christ? How am I as a person, how is my behavior reflecting the love of Christ? Am I putting unreasonable demands on people near me, close to me? Am I putting unreasonable demands and changing the end posts of the game with the poor, the homeless, the sick. I've heard people say, oh, people who are homeless have to fix their employment status, their addiction problems, before they can be properly housed. If you don't have a house, an address that you can use, I have overheard bosses say that this person was a great candidate, but they were not sure they should hire him because they were homeless. Well, how do you not get homeless if you don't have a job? And so we put all these barriers. Okay, you want to be not homeless, so you get a job, but you can't get a job because you're homeless. So you're supposed to have a home first and then get a job. But you can't have the home because you don't have a job. You have an addiction. You need to cure that addiction before you can get a home and get a job. Oh, no, you have an addiction. No, you can't have a job. You need medical attention to take care of that addiction. Well, first you have to have a job that has health benefits. But you can't get the job because you have an addiction. It's changing those rules. You have to do this, but no, you can't do it that way. This is where you need to be. Oh, but you can't do it that way. It's very toxic behavior. It's that toxic boss behavior. And scary when you think about it, how we've bought into this behavior, bought into this idea. Is it Christ-like? I think that's the biggest thing that we need to be thinking about right today. How is my behavior Christ-like? Am I making it more difficult? I mean, God said love your neighbor as yourself. Okay. So do I put all these conditions before I can give you the love? You have to be healthy, you have to be housed, you have to be employed. Or can I show you love by meeting you where you're at? You're hungry? Oh, I'll feed you. You need a place to live? We'll get you a place to live. You're ill? Let's get you well. That's really something to think about, huh? I hope you think about it. I hope you think about how this book here tells us all these stories of the people that we know, that we are. We haven't changed a lot, right? We're blame throwers like Adam. Okay? We're the toxic boss. We are an enabler. We're cowards. Think about that. And, maybe spend some time reading about, despite all of that behavior, these people went on to be an important part of God's story. So where do you fit in to being an important part of God's story? Okay. All right. We'll see you next week back here looking at ordinary people in the Bible, hopefully looking and seeing ourselves. Thank you. Bye.